Welcome back to Bold Like a Leopard. Whatever way that you're watching or listening to this today, I want you to subscribe to me on the all tech platforms. So those are BitChute, Rumble, and Odyssey below. And you can see my screen names on them over there. And I'm going to start doing once in a while some of these shorter updates as I have availability during the day once in a while. So today, I think that the topic I want to address, I know that there are many topics that I would have better served by talking about them at length, but this is something I think doesn't take too long to talk about. And it's something that, again, I talk about because it is sometimes something that I have specific experience with. But it isn't something I want to be obsessed with. It isn't something I want to tell you, the viewer, to agree with me on. I think it's fully worth discussing, and that is the affairs in the Middle East, and specifically in this case with Israel getting a new government. And a lot of the reason that I am talking about this today is because there's a lot of confusion because a new government has come into power, and some people are calling it a leftist government. Other people are calling it a centrist government. Other people are calling it basically like a globalist government. And the fault line is very, I would say it's very much a confusing affair, because if you talk to people who are traditionally very Zionistic, whether they're American, whether they're Israeli, Christian, Jewish, or whatever, they are not enthusiastic about Naftali Bennett, the new Prime Minister of Israel. As you might know, right? Because I know many people don't actually care about this, so that's fine. But the last Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, was the longest serving Prime Minister in the country's history. He served, in this case, 12 years. By the way, some people don't know, he also served for 3 years back in the 1990s. And Bennett has dethroned him. And I actually spoke to my cousin about this, who is pretty knowledgeable. And when I was living there, I lived there after high school. I went to the Army there because my parents are, well, both of my parents were Israeli citizens. My mom since passed away. But he was always one of these people that I believed was has like a real perspective that's educated on everything. He's not somebody who's simply a casual observer. I think he's somebody who can read between the lines. So I speak to him on the phone every once in a while about things like this. And he was saying that one of the reasons that Bennett was able to take power with only 7 seats in his party out of 120 is because Benjamin Netanyahu had alienated so many of the factions that are in the Knesset, such that at this point nobody wanted to make a deal with him. Nobody wanted to be in his government because they can't trust him. And this is one of the things that I think people who live here, people who are reflexive supporters of Israel, don't understand. It's that people who live over there and experience the life there on a daily basis and know, they have to deal with the taxation, they have to deal with the fines, they have to deal with a lot of the actual, nitty gritty of actually living in a country. They don't like Netanyahu to the degree that people who live in the rest of the world who are Israel supporters, whether they're Jewish or not, a lot of them seem to have this love affair with him, and I just don't necessarily understand it because I lived there. He was, at the time when I was living there, I believe he was the foreign minister for a while. He was also finance minister for a brief period. I would say that Benjamin Netanyahu, the legacy that people will never talk about, was that he was one of the primary reformers of Israel's financial system. He is somebody who initiated a lot of the privatization of the state industries and made Israel into a much more manageable and efficient economy. But he was a very flawed person. There are many accusations of corruption against him. And something that I think that Israel critics don't get right and that they never really address is the fact that if you are an Israeli politician who has committed wrongdoing, you are generally held accountable. There are people that obviously escape accountability, but I can remember that there was long time ago. I think he was even in prison when I was living there. There was Aryeh Deri, minister for the ultra-Orthodox party Shas. He was in prison. The president of Israel later went to prison, Moshe Katsav. And Itzhak Mordecai, who was the defense minister, went to prison for rape. Moshe Katsav also for rape. So whether it's financial crimes, whether it's sexual crimes, it isn't by any means a safe system for these people. And I think that it's one of the few areas where I think that the Israelis actually are, they live up to sort of the mission that people attribute to them. Like people try to say, oh, Israel is like this light unto the world or whatever. In many cases, I don't agree with that. I think that they have many very serious problems with their society. I couldn't handle it at a certain point. I also wasn't really going anywhere in my life over there, so I came back here to the U.S. So I would say that the perspective that I'm going to bring here is that this government is something that people should give it a chance, and we'll see what happens. And it could be something for the better of the country and the better for the Middle East, or it could be more of the same. It could be more disaster. It could be more wars, or it could be something that would be very, very temporary. And I'll try to explain a little bit why. And hopefully, if you have any questions, you put them in the comments and you ask me, what about this issue? What about these people? So the background is that after this latest election, now Israel's been through 4 elections in the past 2 years because you need a 61 vote majority within the 120 member Knesset, which is the parliament of Israel, in order to form a government. And every single time there would be a very temporary coalition that would fail because there were not enough, there was some issue where Netanyahu would basically kick out one of these other parties because they would be asking him to live up to something that he wanted, and basically would say, or that they would be asking him. This is what's so confusing. He would do the coalition agreement, and then they would say, well, you agreed that we would do this. He'd say, no, I don't think I'm going to do that. Like he would basically renege on his promise. And over there, once enough people leave the government and it falls due to a vote of no confidence, well, then you go to a new election. So he tried and failed to form a new government in April, apparently, with 52 votes that were in the Knesset. And apparently, so in May, they were able to cobble together a new coalition government and this is what's so confusing. So this is why I would say it's not a left government, it's not a right government, and we might not even know at a certain point whether it will remain a government, because it's very haphazard. Okay, so apparently, as of right now, there's all these parties are in the government. You have the Yamina party, which literally means rightward, which is a party that is for settling within the West Bank, settling Jewish families within the West Bank, which is a territory that was taken in 1967 in the war between Israel and the Arab neighbors. The West Bank was previously controlled by Jordan. A lot of people forget that it was controlled by them and not by any other country like Palestine, for example, which is something that is very critical to this issue. The next party would be Yesh Atid, which is actually the largest party in the government. Yesh Atid means there's a future. So they're led by Yair Lapid. They're a party. So this is why the left-right argument doesn't necessarily apply in this situation. They are not a left-wing party. They are a secularist party. They don't believe in religious involvement in state affairs and in societal affairs and legal affairs. The next party is the Blue and White Party, which is a centrist party, led by Benny Gantz, who's a former chief of staff of the Israeli army, the IDF. The next party is the New Hope Party, which is a moderate right-wing party led by Gidon Sar. They're pretty new. The next party is Israel Beihenu, which is a traditionally right-wing party, but they're mainly made up of, or they used to be at least, they used to be made up mainly of Russian immigrants. And they're gradually drifting to the center. And then there's various other ministers, and then there's the Labor Party, which is a traditionally left-wing party. There is Meretz, which is definitely a left-wing party, and there is also, I think that's it. So that's all the parties. There are deputy ministers. So there's the Ram Party, the United Arab List, which is an Arab party. That would be also a first within the government. This is the first time that an Arab party is actually participating actively in the government. Now, one might ask, what's the reason? Why would a party decide, a party that's an Arab minority party, decide to join a government when generally the Arab parties in Israel have taken the view that their participation in the affairs of state is strictly in order to represent the social interests of the Arab population insofar as they are Palestinian people living under Israeli law. And the reason that I believe that he did it, if I'm not mistaken, and there could be other things that have been said publicly, there could be things that we don't know, that are only between Mansour Abbas, who's the head of Ra'am, and the new prime minister. I believe that the reason that they did it is because they've decided it's important enough for them to dispense with Netanyahu that they would join the government. Now, in order to understand who's opposing it, you have to understand there's all these other groups that are in the Knesset that are against this new coalition. The largest group in the Knesset, so this would be possibly the first, I think it's the first government in a long time where the largest party in the parliament is not in the government. That would be the Likud. That is the party led by Benjamin Netanyahu. Another party that's not in the government is the Shas party. They are an ultra-Orthodox party. They have 9 members. Okay, so losing those 9 members and losing the Likud's 9 members, so that's 39 members of parliament, members of the Knesset. And then you go down the list. There's the United Torah Judaism. They're known as Yahadut Torah in Hebrew, meaning the Torah, the Judaism of the Torah. So they are a party that's made up of Ashkenaz ultra-Orthodox Jews. The Shas party is made up of Sephardic Orthodox Jews. That's the main distinction. So unfortunately, this is actually a problem if you think about it. There's ethnic divisions in Israel that don't seem to go away, and I think that they will go away one day because there will be families that intermarry and all of that, but they'll never completely go away. It'll be something that is going to continue to fester simply because people like to keep their own their own group together. It is something that's talked about now a lot more in the U.S. with talk about racial nationalism, whether it's these black nationalists or the white nationalist groups, or even now we're talking about groups like Atzlan, the Hispanic Southwest nationalists in parts of the U.S. that used to be part of Mexico. Well, in Israel, there's similar issues because there are institutions that are traditionally Sephardic, there's institutions that are traditionally Ashkenaz, and there's institutions that are also within those. It's a very strange situation that if you don't live there or you don't know people who are involved in it, it does get a little bit obscured because people don't really have a reason to delve into it unless they're close to it. Another party that is not part of the government is the Religious Zionist Party. So the other 2 parties that I mentioned, the United Torah Judaism and Shas, they are ultra-Orthodox parties. The Religious Zionist Party isn't necessarily ultra-Orthodox, although I would say that they're more religious than the party that used to be called that, because you see they're made up of a group that includes the Otzma Yehudit group, which is an ultra-nationalist organization. They're made up of people who are very hawkish on the settlements. And their leader is Itamar Ben-Gvir, who is a lawyer who's been arrested many, many, many times for allegedly illegal acts in the settlements. He's been arrested by the Israeli government. And he's finally been elected after many, many years where he was trying to be elected. Now he is in the government. And then, of course, you also have the Joint List, which is the other Arab parties, Hadash, Tal, and Balad, which are more radical Arab parties. They're very much against this idea that you're going to have an Arab party within the government. And they're against the concept of Israel being a country to begin with. So this isn't something that is really new in any sense of the word. It's a very obvious case where things have been like this for a very long time. They're not going to change. And then, of course, rounding it out, you have these three other parties that are already part of the government. So you can already see within the government, you have parties that are left-wing like Meretz and Labor, and you have parties that are secularist, but they're not necessarily left-wing or right-wing like Yesh Atid and the Blue and White Party. And you have Israel Beitenu, New Hope, and the Yamina Party, which are more to the right. So you can say that this is a government, first of all, that includes very different segments of the government. You have people who are supporting settlements in the West Bank, which is in Israel, they're called Judea and Samaria. And you have parties that are against it. There's parties like Meretz that are for returning them to the Palestinians. You have parties that are, like I would say the main common theme of the government is that the majority of these parties are secularists. The only party that is not a secularist one is the Yamina Party, which is led by Naftali Bennett, who himself is, he's modern Orthodox Jewish. So people have to bear in mind that when you look at other countries' systems of governments, there are certain things that are the same, but yet there are certain things that are they don't necessarily translate here to the U.S. Many of the arguments we have here, such as the deficit, such as abortion, such as the right to keep and bear arms, such as whether there's going to be universal health care. Those things don't really exist over there because those aren't the day-to-day issues. And I would say that if you look at this experiment that is happening, it is an experiment. That's what I would call it. We will see how long it'll last. I don't necessarily have confidence it'll last because you have many different preferences as to what's going to, what the character of the country is going to be. And, if Naftali Bennett remains prime minister for the foreseeable future in this configuration until he completes his term, I would say it would be a very impressive task. I think it would probably, just like whenever a politician is successful, he would be able to get reelected. But that's leaving out a major issue. Okay, unlike in most countries, in this case, he is only going to serve part of the term. The alternate prime minister over here is Yair Lapid. He is the head of the Yesh Atid party. There is the future party, and many of my friends in Israel who are not religious are supporters of his because, first of all, he was a popular TV presenter. He was generally considered a very dignified journalist, somebody who was not, just he wasn't just like a squawk box. He did have very, very, very deep columns and very, very well-written columns and things like that. But he is a secularist. And if he takes over as prime minister, if this actual rotation agreement, as they call it, happens, that would also be an impressive accomplishment. And I think both of them could benefit from this. And I am not optimistic that it's going to happen. I'm not optimistic that this government will survive. But I do think that this is an important statement about the country and what they want the world to see it in Israel as an image. Now, I do want to stress, though, apparently Israel launched airstrikes on Gaza in response to incendiary balloons. So there were these. What's generally done is the Hamas group, they will attach bombs or in some cases Molotov cocktails, and they'll put it onto basically a balloon, and it'll float over the Gaza fence and cause basically brush fires in Israel's in Israel's fields over in the southern part of the country, and then and that's in the best case, right? So or obviously if it doesn't land at all and it lands in the water, hopefully nobody gets hurt or no animals get hurt either. But if it lands in a populated area, yes, it can cause serious damage. It can actually it can cause damage to structures. It's an incendiary device. So they've attacked the Gaza Strip in response to this, and this would be probably defined as a show of force by the prime minister, the new prime minister of Israel, to show that I'm not going to be a bitch just because I'm not Benjamin Netanyahu. Doesn't mean that you can shove me around. Now, I will say that it's not exactly something that is going to be an easy task for Naftali Bennett to manage this government, because this is how it went when he was installed. So the Knesset speaker is trying to get people to sit down and let the process unfold.
לקרוא לסדר. חברת הכנסת מאי גולן, אני קורא אותך לסדר פעם ראשונה. חבר הכנסת בן גביר, אני קורא אותך לסדר פעם ראשונה. תודה רבה. אנא תאפשרו לקיים את הדיון בצורה מסודרת. אדוני חבר הכנסת אבוטבול, תודה.
So what's generally not common here in the US, especially not in the Senate, is you're not if you're a member of the body, you're not allowed to just shout random things and yell at other people. It will usually it'll get you removed from the arena. In this case, they do it all the time. It's something I forgot happened, but it happens literally all the time over there.
חבר הכנסת מלכיאלי, אני קורא אותך לסדר פעם ראשונה. חברת הכנסת גולן, מספיק. בבקשה. חברת הכנסת שטרית, תודה. חבר הכנסת אשר, כל אחד יקבל הודעה אישית. אני קורא אותך פעם ראשונה לסדר, חבר הכנסת אשר, תודה. בבקשה.
So he's waiting this whole time because the opposition members are basically jeering him and saying, oh, we're not going to let you give your maiden speech.
חבר הכנסת אבוטבול, אני קורא אותך לסדר פעם ראשונה.
כבוד נשיא המדינה ראובן רובי ריבלין, נשיא המדינה הנבחר יצחק בוז'י הרצוג, אדוני ראש הממשלה בנימין נתניהו, גברתי נשיאת...
חבר הכנסת סמוטריץ', נא להוציא אותו מהמליאה מיד. נא להוציא אותו מהמליאה מיד. את חברת הכנסת וולדיגר, נא להוציא מהמליאה.
So this is Smotrich, who is the head of one of the factions that's on the right wing. So they're basically dragging him out of the Knesset because he's condemning Naftali Bennett. He considers him a traitor to the cause. So this is the face of a real democracy. It's not a pretty face necessarily, but it is a face of democracy. And I want people to remember this. Even democracies have serious flaws, and even democracies have very complicated issues that can't just be distilled into right versus left arguments or, one issue defining everything. It is something that I find to be fascinating, but also frustrating about that country. And I'm sure if you look at most of the countries in Europe and countries that have parliamentary systems, you do see issues like this. Maybe not all the characteristics are the same, but there are things that are translatable. So that's about it. I would classify this as not as a left-wing government, but as kind of a broad coalition, and we'll see what happens. You always hope for the best, and by the best I mean it's the best for the people of that country, of Israel, but also the best for the world and the best for society. Unfortunately, I think the news from the rest of the world right now is also pretty negative. So you still have to keep your eye on the ball and not ignore all of the major issues that are happening. I will probably make a video later. I don't know whether it's going to be today, but about the Biden visits to the G7, and I think he did a summit with Russia with Vladimir Putin. Those are certainly going to need a much more thorough examination than what's going on in this video. So like, share, and subscribe. Also subscribe to me on BitChute, Rumble, and Odyssey. And you can follow me on Gab and Minds if you want to interact on social media. And you can also chip in at Subscribestar. Have a great day.